Okay, in the last video, we just talked about the formation of these limbic system loops and how something called the allostatic load, that total level of stress, can build up. But fortunately, we also mentioned how between the stimulus and response, there's this space in which we can choose a new response. So in this video, we're going to get into a little bit deeper on what it actually looks like to transform your stress response and how that works. So in 2011, there was a really interesting paper that came out called Rewiring the Stress Response, a New Paradigm in Healthcare. And in that paper, there were 4 key points that were made. The first one is that when you're experiencing this hypervigilance or these conditions that may have brought you here, the first thing to note is that it's not us, it's our wiring. Remember, we are wired for survival. The second point is that our wiring actually determines our brain state. So in this case, the fight, flight, or freeze response, if that's what our brain has defaulted to more often of the time. And keep in mind, this isn't just limited to the brain state, because the brain is uniquely situated as the chief orchestrator of all of the bodily cells and systems. That brain state then determines your body state as well. The third point is that these states can become persistent. This is where it gets into conditioning, or this learning effect that the brain has. Now, when we talk about learning, we're not talking about intellectual learning. We're talking about a sort of memory that goes a bit deeper than that. It bypasses conscious thought. And the fourth point, and the most exciting one, I think, is that we can actually change our wiring. Yes, through what's known as self-directed neuroplasticity, which is exactly what you're going to do here in this program. We can actually send new messages of safety back to the limbic system, ultimately transforming what was once a threat response into something called a challenge response. So let's see what that looks like and what the difference between these responses is. In the threat response, this is where the body is anticipating physical harm. Whereas when we get into that challenge response, the body actually feels safe. In the threat response, blood vessels constrict to minimize the loss, whereas when we're in the challenge response, stroke volume of the heart actually increases, so we get an increase of blood and oxygen and nutrients to all of our organs and systems in the body. When we're in that threat response, the body ramps up inflammatory activity, as we've seen. But when we get into the challenge response, actually we go into an anti-inflammatory state. In the threat response, energy and resources are quickly consumed, and in the challenge response, we have this increase in available energy, so increase in working capacity. You can think of this as like the brain has now activated that parachute, right? The parasympathetic function. And because that survival state has come down, which is very energy intensive, all of a sudden, a tremendous amount of energy is now liberated to resume those functions of proper digestion, proper breathing, proper wound healing, and all of the things, immune function, that can help us to heal and recover. Now, when the body feels like it's under threat, it also activates something known as the cell danger response, or the CDR. And this is a protective mechanism on a cellular level. So similarly to what your body is doing on a more global level, the cells try and protect their resources. They stop producing energy as efficiently. They also stop communicating with neighboring cells. They kind of wall themselves off. But then when we break this response and transition into that challenge response, it activates the opposite effect, which is something called the cell safety response, or CSR. When the cells feel safe, they're able to produce full energy and resume proper cell-to-cell communication throughout the body. Being in that prolonged threat state also has been known to actually speed up the aging process, whereas being in the challenge state actually slows aging down. Here's a really interesting note, is that the threat response has also been shown, if kept for a prolonged period of time, to lead to a decrease in brain volume, particularly in the frontal cortex. Whereas in the challenge response, we actually can see an increase in brain volume. And in fact, a lot of exercises, self-directed neuroplasticity exercises, have been shown to increase the volume of the hippocampus. So the threat response also triggers the limbic system, as we've mentioned, which is our fight or flight response. And when we're in that predominant fight or flight space, we tend to react out of emotion. Fear and self-doubt are common experiences. Whereas when we're in that parasympathetic state, then we're able to not just react out of emotion, but actually respond with confidence and control. Of course, when we're in the threat response, our health and performance suffer, whereas in that challenge response, we're able to sustain high levels of performance for long periods of time. And lastly, when we're in the threat response, our main motivation is to avoid harm. Whereas when we get into the challenge response, now your motivation is to go after what you want. Let's just summarize here how this limbic kindling builds up so that in the next videos, we're going to jump into a sort of choose your own adventure section here. We'll have several different loops modeled out. Feel free to just jump into the one that most aligns with your condition. Of course, if you want to go through multiple ones and gain a different perspective or understanding of these loops and how they can look when they shift into the challenge response, you're very much welcome to go through all of them. But just to summarize here, this phenomenon, which is known as limbic kindling, is a process by which that allostatic stress load builds up and then we experience that trigger. So let's recap quickly here before moving on. So it first starts with a slow, gradual buildup of that allostatic load, total stress load on the nervous system. You can think of this and these precipitating factors like friction, right? We sort of have this like friction internally, and it can even kind of feel that way. Then comes that acute stress, the trauma, the illness or injury, and this is what we call in this program a spark. And of course, when you have a buildup of friction and then you add a spark, sometimes we get a flame. And this is what we experience as the heightened immune reaction or symptoms. Then these symptoms lead to this chronic sympathetic arousal. What we've said earlier is a state of sympathetic dominance. And when that persists, because it doesn't feel good to be in that threat response, we feel discomfort, we feel worry, we sense fear, and we try and move to even subconsciously avoid feeling that way, which is very understandable. But remember, when we do that, when we wince up or tense up against the symptoms, when we move in a way that confirms to our brain that they're dangerous, when in fact now we know they're not, this sends a message of confirmation back to the limbic system to reinforce that it should keep on producing that danger response. And this leads to further sensitization and ultimately impaired immune function. So, this has been a lot of information to take in. Let's take a break. Let's take a breath, take a pause. In the next videos, as I mentioned, feel free to just choose the loop that most aligns with what you're experiencing. And then, most excitingly, as we get on to week 2 of the program, we're going to learn the actual protocol, the steps of the technique that we can use to not only get in that space between stimulus and response and start to wire in a new response, but to do it in such a way that can lead to a new default state. This is where things get exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video.